Okay, let's call the meeting to order. And we have a quorum. Quorum is confirmed. I acknowledge we're located on the territory of the Lakwatak people. I have a motion to adopt the agenda for November 8th, special meeting at the Committee of the Whole.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. There are no petitions or delegations. Adoption of the minutes, that the minutes of the special meeting, Committee of the Whole, held on June 7, 2023, be adopted.
Move adoption.
Councillor Lott and
Second.
Councillor Mooney. Director Mooney. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. There's no minutes arising, no chair's report, staff report. Have a motion that the report from the Chief Administrative Officer be received.
I would like to move that in its entirety, please.
Director Baker.
Second.
Moves it in entirety. I'm never going to live that down, am I? Okay, opposed? It's carried. So we're going to hand it over to staff who have done a lot of work on this. So away we go. Staff.
Good morning, directors. We're here today to provide some feedback and finalize the strategic plan, which will guide the work for all of us in the next few years. In June, we had a great discussion and debate and covered a lot of ground, came up with 3 focus areas for strategic priorities. And we did run out of time to finalize a vision statement, so the board tasked Tracy Lawrenson to summarize and bring something back to you. So today we have some options before you. And we also wanted to do a check-in and make sure we got things right in the strategic plan as you articulated back in June. And so we've invited Tracy back as well to walk us through the strategic plan and provide you an opportunity to provide feedback so that we can tweak this and finalize it. And I will pass it over to Tracy, who's joining us remotely.
You're muted, Tracy. Can you unmute yourself?
We can't hear you, Tracy.
Well, Tracy's and staff are working to connect her audio. I do want to add that we will add a territorial acknowledgement onto the strategic plan. The draft doesn't include that, but we'll make sure that that's included in the final version.
Excuse me, Chair, while we're waiting, can we have a resolution on the temperature of the room, please? I find it a little warm for short little fat people.
Do you want to make a motion, Director Baker?
That we turn down the temperature to 67 degrees. All in favor?
Yeah, okay. In favor of reducing the temperature?
A little bit. Opposed?
Oh. So, anyone against lowering the heat? Oh. All in favor? It's defeated.
I think the staff should be allowed to vote as well.
Just got a message from Director Susan Sinnott. She's running a little bit late. She'll be here.
Well, I have some thoughts on the vision statements.
Is the issue on our end or her end?
You text her?
Oh, she got kicked out.
maybe while we're waiting, I'd love to know what our goal is today. Are we like trying to finalize this draft? Are we giving input so that another draft can come back to us? What are our goals?
Ideally, we adopt it today, but if not, we can, carry on in the process. I mean, what we've done is compiled the input that we got from the board into this, provided some options for some mission statements, but what we have is what you gave us. So unless you have more, which we can do if you want, but this is all we have based on what you gave us.
Mr. Chair, do you want a motion while we're sitting here?
If someone has thoughts on that, certainly.
Move option 3.
Yes.
Move option 3.
Might want to have her speak to it maybe before.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion on option 3.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, the committee would be making a recommendation to the
Yes,
board.
that's right. It'd be moved that it be recommended to the board that option 3 be adopted. Moved by Director Wally, seconded by Councillor Lott. Director,
Tracy, can you speak so we can hear you? We cannot hear you.
Tracy, I have had an issue with Teams before. If you try shutting down your computer completely, like turning it off, unplugging your camera, if you are using external camera, that often brings it back. Good luck.
Should we have a conversation about connectivity?
anybody want to call the question, or you want to talk to Tracy Lawrenson first? Okay, all in favor? Anybody opposed? That carries. So let's just wait to see if we can get Tracy on talking to us here.
Director Mawhinney has her hand.
Director Mawhinney.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to note
you.
that on the overview page, it states that we work closely with 10 local First Nations communities. And I know that our territorial acknowledgement has recently been updated to include the Quecas and Tla'amin nations. And I'm not sure if it would be appropriate to update the number 12 or to just sort of leave it as a non-numeric language to be more inclusive.
How is it non-inclusive now?
Well, because 10, if you look at the webpage that we have on the SRD webpage that describes the 10 nations, the Quecas Nation and the Tla'amin Nation are not listed there. So that would mean if we have recently moved to update our territorial acknowledgement, then there is more than 10
Then we should update this.
in some way. Yeah.
Is that a motion?
If that's how we have to go, then yes. I would leave it up to staff whether to increase it in the number or to change the language to say something like many and just be more inclusive without being decisive.
Is there a seconder to direct staff to,
Yeah, I'll second that.
okay, we have a motion on the floor. Any discussion? Staff?
Sorry. Yes, Director Mawhinney and I spoke about this before, and I think that we will use the term many or several, something like that, because on our website it refers to communities located within the boundaries of the SRD, and our territorial acknowledgement goes beyond those communities to include other nations where their territories are reflected within the nation or within the SRD. So I would recommend that we lose the numeric term.
Okay, is that acceptable to the mover and the seconder? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, how's Tracy doing? Tracy, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
And we can hear you.
Oh, whoever suggested the logging back in, thank you.
The volume is so low.
You're a little bit quiet, Tracy. Do you want to just try speaking again?
I'll just lean in here so my head's gotten large, but I can hear you crystal clear if you can hear me.
We're good to go, thanks.
Yep, it's good.
Perfect. Is it possible to bring the strategic plan up on screen in the meeting?
Yes, we can do that.
I heard that you got through the vision statement in my absence. I need to hop off more often.
Yes.
That's an effective decision-making process. Go you guys.
We're good.
You are. I'm impressed. It took 40 minutes for one of my clients to get through a similar exercise. So that's a high achieving decision-making model there. I was really impressed with your board when I met with you. The clarity with which you see your region, especially as diverse as your region is, was something that made this plan in some ways easier than others because you have a wide range of elected representatives around the table, but a real clarity on on how you sort of see the region at the highest level. You should be very proud of yourselves.
So we have the presentation up, Tracy.
Excellent. Okay. So I'm not entirely sure where you got to. So if somebody can just set the stage about where we're at here.
We haven't really done anything.
Okay.
Like in terms of, while we were waiting for you, no.
Okay, so this draft takes the work that we did at the session, and it is my interpretation of what I heard you say. So this is very much, the word draft really does matter in this because it's got to be something owned by you as a board. And there was help from management when I needed clarity, but anything that's wrong is my fault. Anything that's right is your talented staff. But in essence, what we had is, if you don't mind, I'm not sure, is it Edith that's helping me with the screen?
It is.
Okay, Edith, if you don't mind just moving through the pages here, and if I could just tell you next page, if that works for you.
That works just fine.
Excellent. So let's just walk through this, and maybe we can just do a quick overview of what's in here and then go back and see whether it reflects your not necessarily solely your reflections of the workshop, but also your intentions of how you want to serve the region through the term. So moving along, Edith, please.
Can you see the presentation that I'm showing?
I can see the draft, the page draft. I'm not seeing it change on my computer.
Okay, so we're on to the Strathcona Regional District Board first page right now.
Okay, on Teams it's not changing, but I've got a copy of it here, so I can walk through that as well in my on my end.
Okay, so which page would you like me on?
No, just keep moving through it. I'm just not sure on Teams. It's not. I don't know who else is on Teams, but it's not advancing, Edith, on Teams.
Okay, so we show Teams here and it's advancing on our screens.
Oh, well. My Teams is really not cooperating here.
Interesting. Okay, I'll keep going.
The background on the regional district itself comes from staff, and that's just basically background information. And that was something that you had in your previous plan that candidly I really like, just for anybody picking up this plan to be able to get some context on what the regional district is and how broad the interests are that you represent around the table. So I'm just pulling it up here. Bear with me here.
I have a comment on the history. I would just love to see a sentence added there that just, says, for somebody picking up this for the first time, the understanding that we came out of the Comox Strathcona Regional District and that we separated in 2008 or whatever it was. That'd be a great sentence to add.
That's a good transition, actually, under the history. Is that where you think it would fit, is on that history tab?
Yeah, just adding another sentence there that talks the history before the 15 years.
Right, yeah, because you were serving the region before that, just under the other governance structure.
Yes, that's
excellent.
correct.
And then so any other comments on the overview page? Okay, we've got the good-looking board there. We then have, some boards like a message from the board or a chair's message. And that's something that once the plan is developed can be added. But that's just something, what we've done here is given you sort of the standard pages that you might have. So we can come back to that and you can decide if you want to have a chair's message in your plan.
Tracy, just if I can just interrupt, what I'd like to do is changes we'd like. Let's talk about them and propose them.
Excellent.
And if no one objects, we'll consider it in, and then we'll vote on all the changes at once at the end. Is that acceptable to everyone? Okay, let's do it that way.
That's a really good idea. So shall I just keep going through this pending, and should we assume that silence is agreement with the structure unless we hear differently? What works best from your end?
Yeah, I think that works. Staff is tracking, our staff are tracking the changes. We can.
Okay. So then we've got the vision. We've got, I was trying to pull, if you recall at the session, trying to pull the wording and phraseology that I was hearing, and I had offered to try to craft that into a vision statement. Option 1 is really the closest to the wording that you used, but there is also, other options for how that can be framed. And what I think is most helpful here is to recognize that this is not the most material portion necessarily of the report, but whatever vision makes its way in, we really want to hear if anybody objects to something, most importantly, and no, I don't believe in that would be the most important feedback, because we don't want staff operating under a vision statement that doesn't reflect the will of the board. If it's close enough, that's probably good enough, versus wordsmithing. But I gave you some options just to show you some different ways that it can be approached. So I'm wondering if we can open that up for discussion.
Tracy, we actually passed vision statement number 3 while we were waiting for you to get on. So I think the board's happy with it.
I hopped back on. Perfect. Okay. So let's move past the vision. These were the values, and we did discuss these, but basically collaboration and community and working as a team, caring and respectful, open and honest, professionalism and creativity. Now, creativity is something that I want to, with creativity as a board does need to come a comfort with a few more mistakes perhaps being made. People are only creative or innovative in an environment where there is some safety to do new things. And then the final value there is a recognition of how hard it is, within your region, and we touched on some of this around economic issues where there's not a homogeneous view, even inside the areas each of you represent, but just that you really do try to keep a regional lens without necessarily ignoring the diversity of your region. Any comments, concerns about these?
Tracy, I just have one question.
Please.
On the values. I mean, the whole concept of the regional district was for many different communities and electoral areas to come together and operate as a federation. There are some statements in here of working in cooperation, but we don't really. I guess we've covered it off. Operating as a federation, because sometimes I've seen directors lose sight that we're a federation and start acting in self-interest and not so much of what's best for the region. And I'm just wondering if we could or should put something in there to that effect, that we operate as a federation of communities rather than, individually.
I think that final point, it was intended to do that, but could certainly be strengthened up in that regard.
Yes.
I think that was sort of the intention that I took out of the discussion we had, but I don't think it's quite as strong as what you, and I think it's maybe a good thing to clarify, because I know that particularly from electoral areas, people sometimes don't understand that even their director still is responsible to the region as a whole. and that might actually mean doing something to their area that is not seen to be positive. So there might be some language that can strengthen that final point. What do others think about that?
I agree.
Yeah.
Do you?
Sorry, Tracy. It's Susan Sinnott, Director Sinnott. I agree. I'm trying to put in a concept, and I think it applies to every single value you've stated that helps me make decisions when I end up with a conundrum, which is a saying from a bencher that says you never go wrong taking the high road.
Right.
And it's sort of, I know we talk about following, being effective, accountable, respectful, integrity, and I like, we adhere to the highest standards of ethical conduct. But I don't know if it's something we put in a sub-value or something else, or put it somewhere else. But when you have a question, we want to make the choice to take the high road. I think it will help everybody when they end up in even these ideas. Are we a federation or acting for our own interest? That's kind of what it's bringing it back to.
So one of the challenges with reviewing these strategic plans at this point is it is helpful if somebody recommends replacement language, or I think we wanted to get this passed, ideally with whatever changes we're making. Certainly, I can take it back with Renee and David and rewrite or strengthen. But if it was helpful if somebody recommends language to replace, because then we don't have to come back again. Or you guys, sometimes this discussion is as important as the language. Do you all agree that the region has primacy over the areas that sent you? And we're not going to forget the areas that sent you, but is that, it's more important that you agree on what we intend, even more so than the wording.
Tracy,
So if somebody, please.
if we could agree on the concept, and then we'll let staff and you wordsmith it to meet that vision that's there, or that value that's there.
The other thing we could do is put the Federation reference into the page prior. That really is the context setting. We could, the history, that attachment to the Comox, we operate as a federation. We could put that into the history and leave these as is.
That'd be good.
Does that work for others? I can't see the table as a whole, just so you know. I can see.
It seems like people are fine with that. Oh, Gerald?
I have one little comment there, that if you're going to use that word federation, you need to define it, because our federal government is a federation, but it's a lot different constructed than what our local government is. In a federation, each member of that federation has their own authority in various jurisdictions, and then the federation has authority over others, and those are clearly defined, and one doesn't override the other. That's not the way it works here.
Right. When we say federation, let me test this with you. Really what we're saying is this board exists to serve the region first. That's why this board exists, is to serve the region. With all its diversity from its membership. But I'm wondering if, I couldn't see which director raised that. I wonder if you have language that you could suggest to go into that history. Because I do think federal and federation, I love the optimism of whoever spoke that people are going to read this. I hope they do, but it might be misconstrued as federal by some.
I think, Tracy, in terms of wordsmithing it, I think we're better off just, receiving the conversation, we're recording it, we're taking notes, and then coming up with appropriate language, we think, to insert it for the board's review.
Okay. And the purpose is to reinforce the regional focus, though, just to be clear on the purpose for which we're doing this.
That's correct. Yes.
To staff, is that clear enough?
Yep.
Because I'm going to ask, David, you and your team to see if you can get that precise language. So let's not leave a topic without enough clarity on that. Do we feel like we're good with that?
I think we're good with that. Tracy, we can move on.
Okay, excellent. So let's go to the next page here then. this is just the process. There's nothing magical in this. If people object, we're rewriting history a bit. But what you'll see is we will talk a little bit today about the reporting. And through that, David will get feedback from you as a board on how often and how. But we'll come to that as we go through the plan. Any comments on this page?
Director Mawhinney?
I just had a question about the reporting, because it is mentioned there, and I was curious. I had some questions, but maybe you're saying that now isn't the time to talk about it? There is a different time to talk about that?
Yeah, we're definitely going to get to that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, next page, please. First of all, you have the most beautiful pictures. Like it's hard to find a bad picture of your gorgeous region. What you'll see is that we've bundled the themes that you said mattered to you as a board under 3 main focus areas. And, as I said at the session, this is more spaghetti than a bento box. There's a lot of interrelationship between these 3. But essentially, the whole reason why you do anything is to improve community well-being. You have a very strong focus on climate resiliency, and the way you achieve that is through strong governance. And we're certainly seeing that as a priority in high-functioning organizations, not just sort of an incidental. And you spoke very strongly about how that was something that mattered to you as a group in terms of relationships and otherwise. But I think it might be best to go through each of these 3 before we spend a lot of time on whether we've got the right 3, because you'll see how they sort of are bundled. And then at the end, we can speak to whether we've got the right bundling, if that makes sense to you.
Yep, let's proceed that way.
Okay, perfect. So next page. So you'll see under each of these that under community well-being, there was a lot of focus on housing, transportation, economic conditions, and health and well-being. Those were sort of the 4 key areas where you as a board felt that your energies were best placed. Any comments, concerns, big missing areas there? And I'm wondering if it might be useful, just before we dive too deeply, Edith, would you be able to flip through just to show the board something, just move through a couple of pages here? Keep going. One more. Keep going. Keep going. We'll come back to where we were. What you'll see as a board is later in the report, each of these areas of focus, like housing, has specific projects attached to it, because it's kind of like woohoo language when you see it in the theme-based plan. I like theme-based plans, but this is where you start to get a sense of what is already in progress or proposed that moves the needle on each of these things. So if housing matters to you, these are some of the areas of focus that are already either occurring or planned. And so David and his team will do the same thing for each of the focus areas. But just so you know, there is a whole nother layer that sits underneath this about how this gets actioned. And that's going to be where a lot of your board decision making is, about how fast, how much. Some of these things will have budget asks. And those projects and initiatives are where the measurements become clearer. It's hard to measure against the areas of focus, but you can see that it's an aggregate of the performance against these priorities and our projects and initiatives. Does that make sense?
We have a speakers list here so far with Director Von Esch and Director Wally.
Thanks, Tracy. Yeah, I think these areas of focus really do represent what we talked about on that day. My only suggestion for change is under climate resiliency, and this was kind of a big discussion that day, and it felt like we were really clear after a lot of discussion and debate that it wasn't just about exploring opportunities to reduce our carbon footprint.
You're absolutely right. Thank you. I forgot about that. Are we done with community well-being just before we go on to that one? That's a really good point. But I wonder if we might finish one of these and then move on, just so that we're not bouncing around, because I think you raised a really good point that I missed.
Yeah, okay. I don't have any comments on the community well-being. I think that's great.
Director Wally?
Yeah, my only concern is the word support housing diversity, support transportation initiatives, support initiatives that develop robust, diverse economic conditions. Support means approve a service That's what support is. That's the only way we do it here. I think it would be more astute to word it to the effect of consider proposals regarding, because we're not necessarily going to support everything that comes to the table here. But we would definitely
Right.
give it serious consideration.
So the verb might be wrong there.
That's my thought.
I think support would probably be appropriate for the housing diversity one because we have approved setting up a housing service.
Yeah, we have a housing service, but it's a very general statement. We're not going to support every proposal for diversity that comes along. We'll support some of them, and some of them we won't. We'll consider them all.
Well, that would be up to the board. Director Mawhinney?
Thank you, Chair. I like the word advance, identify and advance transportation initiatives. I think that's sort of like moving things forward and providing energy, but not necessarily suggesting that we're going to add a requisition for each one of these items. There's a lot of initiatives that are listed here, and that if we are saying that we're going to support them all, that could also mean that we were supporting a lot of new requisitions.
That's, I'm just looking at this. When it says support, it may mean we're not going to block it. It doesn't mean we're going to do anything, but it might mean we're not going to block it. Is that, Director Wally, you had concerns with the support word?
Yeah, no, there are things that I wouldn't agree with that I would hope the board would block. There are other things I'd support, I hope we'd go ahead with. But the problem with all of these things, of course, there's no cost analysis at this stage. So
Absolutely.
cost is, you got to admit it, in government, there's only two things that really matter. One's money and the other, I can't remember what it was. But cost is so important to our taxpayers who we represent. So we just don't jump into everything regardless of the cost. I mean, cost has to be considered. So that's why I would say, no, we need to look at these things carefully. I mean, we're in a time now where the economy is on the edge of perhaps a recession, where a lot of people are having difficulty supporting their families, and we just can't blatantly say, well, you know, all these great ideas, we don't care what they cost, we're going to go ahead with them. They got to be examined carefully. That's my point.
That's a good point. To that, I've got a lot of thoughts on that. But let's go to Director Mawhinney and then Director Lott.
Thank you, Chair. And I just, related to what Director Wally was just saying there, I noticed that in the sort of introduction on the strategic priorities page, one of the things says that we are going to augment service delivery, and I wasn't really sure what that meant, so I looked it up, and it's defined as increase. And that, to me, also necessitates tax increases. So I personally would prefer, rather than augmenting service delivery, providing sustainable service delivery or something along that line, just because I think that if we're suggesting from the outset that we're going to be adding more requisition, I think that's not necessarily very fiscally responsible.
That's a good catch on that page.
Director Lott.
I do like the word consider because that's what this body does. It has issues brought before it, and we consider every single one independently, make a determination on it. Support, to me, intimates that we've already made that decision and we're actually actively promoting it. So I like the language consider. I think that reflects what this board its mandate is.
Okay, we have Director Senna and then Director Baker.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Going back to what Director Mawhinney had mentioned, the head page of the strategic priorities, I agree with the idea of taking away the word augment. I support that. I was thinking it might be more clear to say we're going to address community issues or provide infrastructure or services in a fiscally responsible way. So it sort of brings that into that's how we're doing things. We're going to make all these strong connections, but by doing that, we're also going to address all these community issues, provide infrastructure that benefit the community or however in a fiscally responsible way. And then everything else that falls into the subcategories has that as a sort of precondition, which I think is truly what we're here for. Yeah. The other one I had a question on the community well-being because we hadn't moved on yet was the last one, to identify and support initiatives that improve health and well-being in our communities. And then I looked at the things that we have laid out sort of in the sort of the areas of focus. And I know we have an opioid crisis and we have a lot of suffering in our smaller communities, and we aren't really saying anything about that at this point. I just don't know if staff feel that that would be a priority or something they would bring to us, given what's set out in this strategic plan.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I'm happy you bring that up because that's the kind of clarity we want to hear from you. And if it is important and you want to make sure that it is brought forward, I think here's a spot for it to be, and that input's valuable.
Yeah,
So
I
if
think
you
it's a
don't-
complex issue, but I think it is something we should be addressing. It may not be as big on area, C and B. I'm not so sure about area A, but I think particularly in area D and out to the coast, we have significant issues in some of the smaller communities, and it affects Campbell River as well.
I think if you're uncertain whether it gave clarity to staff, that's an answer in itself, and we'll address the wording in that.
Thank you.
Director Baker.
I agree with Director Sinat. I believe that if you just add the word responsible in front of support or what have you, I think that clarifies it. Thank you.
If I may jump in here, I apologize.
Yes.
I hope I don't. The other thing that is important is these are really good points, distinguishing between what's in your power. And some organizations have an advocacy page in their strategic plan that identifies their 3 or 4 top advocacy initiatives. They should flow from these priorities. We shouldn't be advocating on things that aren't advancing our strategic priorities. I think that where the word support came from, and I can understand the concern about it being a bit of a blank check, same with augment, I think that needs to be tightened up, is that it was actually more a wiggle language than a commitment, in the sense of you need other levels to do those two things. There's different levels of support that you need. It's not entirely within the regional district's power. But I think support is a bit of a wussy word too. Like it's both over strong and kind of imprecise. I think we might be able to strengthen that. We also could put in the values that you make strong decisions with a long-term lens with regard to the sustainable financing, like that's how you do things, which is really what those values are, is more how statements. We could, because none of these things, even these projects, David's populated some of them here. But this is not a blank check for all of those projects. Even if you approve this plan today, you'll have a chance to sort of inquire about those. I'm just confirming that that's correct with the intention from administration of putting the projects in, just to give the board an idea of what the next layer down looks like.
Yeah, 100%.
So we're really focusing on the areas of focus first, with that data just being given for some context on what approving that area of focus might include. But you would have, it's very much like when you approve a master plan, you're not approving the consultant's 100 list of recommendations at the back. Those would come to the board with the ability to approve or reject when the time is right.
Okay, Director Wally.
I would like to see us add one area of focus that I think is really important and should be highlighted, and that is affordability. That a lot of the constituents in our remote areas and electoral areas move out of municipalities because they can't afford to live there. Rent is off the charts. Everything else, of course, with our inflationary economy, has become extremely expensive. Many of them have moved into rural areas. They're living in fifth wheels in their parents' property and various other accommodations. And these people all pay property taxes, maybe not directly, but through rent. And I think affordability for our constituents should be a major area of focus. There's a lot of things that we would like to have, a lot of service that we'd like to offer that perhaps aren't in the category of being absolutely necessary, but would be nice to have, that people just cannot afford at this present time.
What do others think about that? Because we did talk about that under affordability and under housing. And I wonder even adding into the very first line to support housing diversity and affordability, like, and for sure, because that was a discussion, was not, we need bigger, more expensive, not saying that those are a bad thing, but that affordability and then that fiscal restraint that we've been sort of talking around in terms of the concerns about the use of the word support.
Okay, we're going to hear
Do we
from
want this a separate focus?
Director Von Esch and then Director Mawhinney.
Yeah, I do think that's a good point. I think one of the struggles that we're all facing right now as we're representing our people is that we are in an affordability crisis. And people are, struggling with taxes, and we are, we're adding new services. We've already approved some services, and looking at here, there's a lot more that we're considering. And my reflection from folks that I represent certainly are that affordability is a big issue. I'd like to see that added. And I just had one comment on the area of focus for identifying and support transportation initiatives. Finalize the regional transportation study. Are we? We're on community well-being. It's part of community well-being.
Yeah.
So finalize the regional transportation feasibility study. So we have a West Coast transportation feasibility study that we're working on. So I would just change regional to West Coast.
And all of these projects and initiatives will come back to you. Just this was an example of having all of these, but thank you for catching that. Really what we're worried about here are the areas of focus. What do others think about changing the area, like adding an affordability? The fact is that most of the stuff you're doing does make the community less affordable. It makes it better to live there and makes it more expensive in terms of buying homes and that sort of thing. I guess what I would want to know is what are your initiatives that you would have if affordability was an area of focus? What would the work that staff do be around that?
Okay, Director Sinnott, I think, is next.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. That was kind of my exact question for Director Wally in terms of the focus here. Would it be to reduce regulation and reduce costs that are downloaded by our behavior, or is it part of the poverty reduction strategy that comes out of well-being in our communities? I wasn't sure what the direction to staff would be, because when I'm looking at anything that comes in front of me and I have the strategic plan sitting on the side of my desk, I'm like, yep, you're hitting our strategic plan, or you brought something that isn't in our strategic plan, why are we doing this? So if people are working on poverty reduction, I don't know if that's hitting what you think, because I think you're thinking regulatory burdens and new initiatives that just keep downloading another $1 or $2 or $5 or $10 or $20. That's what I think you're thinking. And then how does that translate to when we get a decision in front of us? It's kind of like waste management. They're trying to get out of a job. Are we trying to reduce our work and have less work by government so people have more money in their pocket, basically?
Okay, we have Director Wally and then Director Mawhinney and Director Von Esch. No, you're good? Okay.
Yeah, just in a quick response there to Director Sinnott. It's not poverty reduction that was foremost in my mind there. That's another issue. I'm not talking about constituents who are living below the poverty line. I'm just talking about constituents who are working for a living, but have a great problem putting food on the table for themselves and their children, meeting their rent and supporting their vehicles and everything else. As we all know, the cost of everything has gone high, and it could continue to go a lot higher. The prospects for a reduction in this inflation are slim. Interest rates are going up. And I think that everything that we consider at this board table should be considered under that magnifying glass of how much this is going to cost, how much it's going to put taxes up, can people really afford this? As I said, a lot of these services aren't necessary services, they're just luxuries. And if you got the money, luxuries are great. But if you don't, they're unobtainable. That was my main focus.
Okay, Director Mawhinney.
Thank you, Chair. And I think that maybe what I was hoping to bring into this piece of the conversation kind of addresses what Susan Sinnott was asking also. And it's something that I've been considering when I was reading the strategic priorities and the good governance section in particular, talking about asset management. And I was feeling like another bullet point under good governance would be fiscal responsibility, which would furthermore say careful management of services and assets, providing reliable and affordable services to residents and businesses of the Strathcona Regional District. That seemed to me maybe just a lens that we bring to things, but not necessarily a lens that means that we won't do anything, but that we will be responsible and with the services and assets that we choose.
Any comments on that?
I would love to see that revisited under governance. And I did ask Edith to flip forward here. We could, under area of focus, just have and support. Oh, sorry, go back one further. Just where we were. No, back to where we were on there. Health and well-being in our communities, in an age of, or in a time of affordability challenges. Like, we're not just writing blank checks to do cool things. We're always keeping that friction. But why don't we test and see if the affordability can be handled when we get to the governance section? Does that make sense for the board? And if it doesn't, we can come back.
I think it makes sense.
Okay.
Director Maloney?
So let's.
Hang on.
Thank you. And I know that we're on the community well-being page now. I see that up there. And the only things that I wanted to confirm was that there was there's some language under community well-being on the projects and initiatives that support that theme, which seemed to be maybe like putting the cart before the horse, in the sense of we haven't contemplated a regional health service, and I don't even know what that would mean. So I was concerned with adding things like exploring a regional health service or regional recreation services and supporting a social planning program. In particular, those items sounded like maybe we needed a bit more of a conversation at the board before they got included into a strategic plan, which is going to be on the internet and one of our guiding principles.
If I may jump in here, that is a really astute observation. My recommendation is, Edith, if you don't mind going back towards the start of the plan. My suggestion is that go one more page, is that the plan ends here. This is the end of the plan that gets published. What's remaining was really my fault for creating confusion in wanting David to just give you an idea of what could be initiatives that you would. So that was just, I asked him sort of on short notice even to populate that, just to give you a sense. But I think this is the level that the community needs to know. I just thought it would be helpful to see what projects might be, so that you weren't going, well, how do we measure this? But that's a really astute observation, and I would suggest we approve the plan with the areas of focus. And then that tracking and implementation, it changes as things change. It's not sort of cast in stone or published widely. And as you finish one thing, you want to do more things that move the needle on each of these areas of focus. But you're not approving those projects or priorities. That was just, what are you already working on, whether it's been to the board or not, that might move the needle in this area? So that's what those projects and priorities were, just intended to give you a glance at that, not to become part of the high-level strategic plan.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarity.
That's a good point. Director Wally?
Yes, areas of focus were on that screen there. I see up there, number one, proactively communicate, engage with our communities. I think that is a excellent statement to have in there, and I would just like to ask maybe some members of the board here what they have in mind there. In my experience of 15 years sitting here, I don't believe that we have ever proactively communicated and engaged with our communities on any service initiatives that have come forward. Usually it's up to directors to vote yay or nay, but our communities are totally ignorant about what's going on. As directors in our little communities, we don't have the ability to contact our constituents. We don't have local newspapers. We don't get the Campbell River newspapers. We're totally isolated. So it's up to the regional district to let our constituents know what we're up to. For example, we just had a AAP over housing. I doubt there is even one person in the Seward Valley that even knew that AAP was underway. How could they possibly know?
I wonder
They don't get newspaper, they don't, it's not advertised on the local, what do you call it, social media things. So I would like to see something happen with this. I think it's an excellent idea. but I have no idea what the board has in mind when they put that statement up there.
Okay, this, staff?
Oh, just a comment on that, we haven't done the AP for housing, so they wouldn't know about it. We haven't put it out yet. It is. But we haven't.
If we go to the very last
The board
page of
needs to
this
support that.
Okay, well, let's come up with a way to communicate.
Say again, please.
The very last page of this report has some ideas around what might happen, like develop the communication plan. So basically, this is something, and I know nobody gets excited by plans being built, but they do lead to quick action once built. But the frequency and transparency and processes. So this is a bit about what each of these mean. Do we want to just stick with good governance while we're here?
Why don't we? We seem to be talking about that. And-
Yeah,
but,
great.
Before we do that, I'd like to hear from Councillor Sinha and then Councillor Vanesh.
Yes, thank you, Chair. In answer to Director Wally's question, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I had the long interview with the lady about communications plans. I think it was pretty good because I spent a lot of time in my legal work trying to communicate, like when we have to serve people and get them information and make sure it's actually effective, or else you walk into court and the judge gets you out. I don't ever want to have that situation. So it's different for small towns, and I would appreciate if you want to give staff the same ideas for what's more effective in your town. Like, for example, I was like, if you want to read Island, you better be putting posters on the wharf head, or developing a system where you have waterproof poster boards where you can actually give people information, because they're not going to be getting information usually any other way. So having grown up here, I think you probably also know what's probably going to work, whether it's plain old signage or not. In terms of governance, I think the idea that usually when you're doing directions like end statements and stuff, you say what you're going to do for whom at what relative price. So it's our job to give the relative price information to staff so they know the end goals that they have to have. And I think that's what's currently not in the good governance section, that it's our responsibility to give direction on what relative price that we're going to incur for delivering all this stuff. That's just sort of my comment. I think that addresses pretty much everything that staff need to know. And when we have the conversation on this service, we're saying, well, what's the relative price that we're willing to do? Is it going to be the same as other communities? Are we going to be gold standard, bronze standard, or no standard, because the relative benefit versus the cost to some people who are impoverished isn't worth it?
Director Vanesh.
Yeah, I would just, in response to Director Wally too, under good governance, it seems like this is something this is staff direction, our areas of focus, but is it also our individual direction too, that me as a director proactively communicate, engage with my community?
Yes.
Yeah, I would think so. So does that make sense? I would say that makes sense. And why that came up for me, just this week, I got an invoice from the CortezIsland.com, which is like sort of the website that everybody posts everything on, where I also post director reports. And when I investigated, I understand that this is a constituency cost, and I pass this on to the SRD. So it seems like that does fit under good governance is what we do as a staff and as a team, but it's also what we do as individuals in our community.
Director Mawhinney.
Thank you, Chair. We're on the good governance page, and one thing that I have been personally, as a director, curious about, and was kind of hoping that maybe we could discuss it here during the strategic priorities, is having access to the corporate policies and currently there's very few bylaws and policies available for the public on the SRD webpage, and that's something that I would like to see changed. I'm not sure how other people feel about that. And my other question is around, can we discuss at some point again the climate resiliency area of focus bubble? Because I had one language change.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We'll come back to that. We just jumped ahead because we were on this one already.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Director
On
Baker.
this,
Tracy, I just want to hear from Director Baker first.
Thank you.
Every community, as far as I understand, has the ability to communicate with the people that live in it, either through, if we don't have access to a major newspaper, we have the ability on social media, as well as most communities have newsletters. So there does bear some responsibility to the directors to communicate that to their constituents, not just the SRD. Thank you.
Okay. So there's lots of suggestions, lots of changes we'd like to see made. We are quickly running out of time. I think we are, no, we're not out of time yet. We will have to have another cow to go over this. So I don't think we should be stressing about trying to adopt it at this meeting. It's not going to happen. So let's continue with some discussions on the changes we'd like to see. And we have a speakers list already. We have Councillor Sinnott, Director Sinnott, Director Mawhinney, and Director Rice.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think in terms of good governance directing to staff, I would like to see us specifically have a calendared session where we are given an opportunity to talk about the type of education we as a board need, or schedule education throughout the year as a board. I think good governance starts with us, and I think it's important that we are responsible to take it seriously and plan our own governance training over the following period of this plan. I don't know if that should be put in there, but I think staff should know that we need to have that feedback back and forth.
Tracy.
Apologies, I got
Oh, yes.
bumped off here.
Okay.
But developing a governance calendar might well be an action under that is, a calendar which includes quarterly check-ins, your CAO review. There are some, forks in the road that good governance structures can provide for you on that. Apologies, I do keep getting bumped. So if I disappear for a while, I'm not just grabbing a coffee. I'll come right back in. But one of the things to remember is, as a board, really the focus today is, does that area of focus clearly represent something that matters to you? Because management, if you say we'd like a little more in any of these areas, it's their job to identify what you do the, what matters, they do the how do we get here. But I do, the discussion was fairly strong around your desire to be a high-performing regional district board. So I think those are great ideas.
So what is the pleasure of the board? We're approaching noon. We have a regional district meeting at 12:30. And I think some people need some time for lunch. So what's the desire?
I would suggest that people can email other comments on things we haven't talked about and that goes to Tracy, and then come back to another draft that we address in a cow.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're fine tying a bow on it for today, and maybe the next cow we'll be able to schedule a little more time on it. We'll receive comments. We'll update based on what we've got here, and we'll just revisit it. It's not critical that we adopt today, and we're not going to.
So I might suggest you send those comments through to David, or is it Renee? And just before we end, though, is there enough clarity that staff have on the changes that have been requested today, or is there anything that needs clarification before we?
I think, Tracy, what we're going to do is update based on what we have, but we're not finished here anyways. So we'll update what we have and continue on the next time we meet.
We can have it good for a day where we don't have another meeting right after.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, additional comments go to Renee? Right.
Well, I think to Renee with a copy to the CAO and corporate officer. Yeah.
Just one last thought in terms of time management. Maybe we could do is identify how much time we do want to work on this in order to get some closer to a resolution. Like an hour might not be it, might be 2, 3, 4, whatever we need. Something realistic on, so we're not coming back again and again and again. I like to
I think that's
give
what
it a
Director,
reasonable opportunity to get to a resolution.
Yeah, I think so. Director Wally was suggesting.
Yeah, we'll do it on a day we don't have anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think there's also an opportunity not to have a 4-hour meeting if the comments are sent in to staff prior to.
Right. That would be helpful.
Just before we leave here, I just wanted to say a big thank you to the board. It was a real pleasure working with you, and your region is in very good hands. And I don't anticipate you'll need me back at that follow-up meeting, but I just wanted to tell you what an honor it was to see the direction that you all have for your region. And And again, you know, government gets a bit of a bad rap, but was tremendously impressed by your board's decision-making dialogue, how diverse you are, but how that didn't lead to conflict or people just agreeing with things. You should just be very proud of yourselves, that good governance. And I'm not that nice, so I wouldn't say it if it wasn't true, but that good governance area of focus you're already modeling. So I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this.
Thank you for your kind comments, Tracy. I'll send you $5. So
Thank you.
we are going to adjourn.
Motion to terminate?
Director Lott, Director Rice, all in favor? Opposed? Carried.